And we're delighted to have this event tonight, the screening of the film Closer Than We Think, for a number of reasons. At IFTF, we're always looking for ways to communicate our stories about the future, our forecasts, to the public. And we do that in many different ways. We do that through these beautiful maps, through artifacts of the future. We do it through reports and VR experiences. And we also like to do that through art, through fiction, through visual art, through sculpture, and working with artists, because we think that artists are often futurists. Artists often take new technologies and use them in unexpected ways. And often artists ask questions about new technologies and ideas before we do. And they play a very important role in our culture in that way. And the film you're going to see tonight embodies that idea. It's about a strip that really served to engage the public in futures thinking, and I think to also remind the public that the future isn't something that happens to you. It doesn't have to be. It can be something that you make. And so I hope you enjoy the film, and right afterwards we'll have some time for some questions of the filmmakers and also some amazing panelists who are here tonight who you will actually see in the film as well. So please, enjoy yourselves. Bathrooms are right around the corner. Come on up whenever you'd like. Get some wine, get some beer, drinks, more popcorn, and enjoy the film. Right here. We have about 15 or 20 minutes for some questions, so I'm not going to take up too much time. You were introduced generally to the folks on camera in the film, but I do want to introduce Brett, who directed this documentary, produced and edited it. Where is he? There he is. And then also I'm going to bring up Aubrey, Kirk, and Rick as well. Nice.
We're missing Rick.
Where is Rick? All right, no problem at all. You guys seen the?
He's right there.
There's Rick. Have you guys seen the amazing? These stuck with me since I was a kid. In the '70s, NASA commissioned these beautiful illustrations of future space colonies. You've probably seen them online. We've posted them on Boing many times. Rick painted those. Amazing work. I wish I had an original, but you know, NASA owns those. I'm going to start by asking the first question. What surprised you the most in the process of making this film? What did you learn, or what's totally turned your mind inside out along the way?
I don't know. I think maybe the biggest thing was like kind of seeing that the Jetsons was a parody show. I definitely, identified the Jetsons with just like this pure futurism thing. So to see it, to see Closer Than We Think represented as something more kind of pure and earnest was surprising to me. I think that might have been it. I don't know. I also just to see Radabot change from this mystery figure that I didn't know anything about to actually meeting people who had contact with him was something that made him more tangible, less abstract, and more of a person. So that was another discovery. That has less to do with futurism, but to know that the people who are making all of these predictions are human at the end of the day. It's not a mystic in some way. So,
Questions from the audience? Again, I don't want to take up too much time. Anyone? Otherwise, I got a bunch. I'll tell you. I'm gonna take up the whole time.
Hello? Does it work? Okay. So there was one person that was in the middle of the film was she was working in the museum that showcased a lot of his work, and one thing that she mentioned is that this is not inherently an optimistic future. And one thing that we see almost consistently is dystopian futures within sci-fi. Especially recently, technology like Black Mirror is beautiful, but it's not by any means a stretch. Sci-fi is always usually dark in the futures. During the course of making this, have you found any genuinely optimistic views of the future, especially with technology?
I mean, I think Rick's work is definitely optimistic. I mean, the way that you talk about it in terms of science fiction, when you're talking about telling a story in filmmaking, you are chasing conflict. So it's very hard to tell a story without it. So I mean, I think that leads to a lot of dystopias, where the utopian conflict is, why are we so happy all the time? Do you want to go see that movie? Probably not, But I don't know if, Rick, if you could talk about an optimistic future at all? Or?
Am I on? There we go. Especially in my type, the work that I've done, they're assignments of illustrations. And being an illustrator, and I noticed this with Radabam and his work, that he had an assignment to do with his particular client, and he could make certain statements, but he still had to kind of deliver the mission, and a lot of that was to entertain in what he was doing. A lot of movies nowadays, have that darker edge. I mean, look where Batman's gone, from the cartoons to where it is, and people like that.
I sure miss Adam West, man.
Yeah, and so the change in our perceptions of what is okay and not okay is much broader than it was back in the 60s and the 50s. Back then, if you did not paint that product just right where the client didn't like it, you didn't get a check. So you're kind of driven to often make things more positive, even though there's an underlying in my contact with people who want to talk about space settlements or space colonization, you'll get all kinds of negative feedbacks on, just as that one archivist woman at the cartoon place is escaping the ills of the earth and leaving everybody behind. You could quickly jump to the darker side of the subject if one chose to, but as an illustrator, we staying in there.
Oh, go ahead, Aubrey.
I'd like to say a word about this, because I was actually taken aback by the remark in the movie that you mentioned. But, of course, there's a certain amount of truth in what she said, and what the archivist said. And, as you say, because of largely, the commission, so to speak, the nature of having to, sell papers or sell tickets at the movie theater or whatever, the dystopia does appear a lot. And it certainly makes my life harder in my own work, that people are constantly bombarded by this kind of, compulsion to think this way. But what pisses me off the most, to be honest, about all of this is the fact that it's always done so incredibly badly, the dystopian aspect. A movie like In Time or Logan's Run even or whatever, it'll all be based on some kind of completely arbitrary, supposed new problem that we would create as a result of solving the problem we have today. And there's no criticism, there's no actual, development of whether or not that would occur. It's just completely introduced without any kind of analysis, as if it were kind of self-evident. It winds me up.
She's not here to defend herself, so but I actually really disagreed with her point about Radabau's work. I think he was drawing a future that he wanted to live in. I think he was delighted with the fantasies that he was having about how great things were going to be in the future. So I think she's reading his work in a different way than I would.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the ideas in the film, to have these kind of counterpoint things, and to be able to show different opinions about art. And I mean, that's one of the great things about art, and especially to look at futurism not as text. You're not reading a book. You're looking at a piece of artwork, and two people can see two different things. So I mean, like I like and appreciate Caitlin's opinion, and I think it has merit and value. And after looking at all of these pieces of work of Radabaugh's, it's almost even looking at it as, maybe a nuclear bomb is going to go off, but look, we're going to have great tech to clean up after. So, like it's looking at it in an optimistic way about something terrible.
Well, one of the things that I noticed was that they were discussing how really his work didn't connect, even visually, if it felt like it. It wasn't related to science fiction art. It wasn't on the cover of Asimov or on the pulps, and that's interesting because it reminded me of my partner at Boing, Cory Doctorow, who's a science fiction writer, talks about how I was looking it up here to make sure how science fiction authors are actually terrible at predicting the future, but very good about talking about the present, and that science fiction has great utility as a medium for thinking about and discussing and putting a language around future scenarios, even if it does a bad job at predicting it. And I just found it interesting that his work is really not about science fiction at all. It's about extrapolation or futures thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I in some way, like back to your first question about what really surprised you throughout this, it's that in digging into stuff that I really loved and looking at Radabaugh's artwork, it's that it was all a product of coming out of World War II. That was the thing to look back at and be really surprised by, that it was all just this product of World War II. You're coming out of it and you're like, what do we do with our lives? Where are we going forward? Now that this is over, what do we do? And that's where a lot of that artwork came from. That's where so much of those ideas came from. And without that, I don't know if those predictions would have been made in that way.
Frank Tinsley was an illustrator as well. I think a couple of years later, maybe with Mechanics Illustrated. Did you run across his work at all during this?
I'm personally not familiar with that. Kirk, do you know anybody?
Hey, so I'm okay with the mic, I think. So thank you very much for the film. It's great. I'm an industrial designer, so I'm very curious about what do you see. I like what you said just now about how he was inspired sort of from the era of time that he lived in. There's a lot of optimism, post-World War. What do you see about today? If you looked at all at the kind of artwork of today and the culture of today and what kind of people are doing this kind of futuristic, optimistic type work today? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I don't know anybody who's really kind of a contemporary of Radabaugh in that way, of someone who's doing art that millions of people are seeing every week. I can't really think of, I don't know, a good. I don't know.
Much.
No,
Sure.
but I do think that there's definitely comic art that criticizes and thinks about future possibilities. I mean, XKCD on the internet is a great comic, totally different style, of course. But you also have to remember, I mean, in the context of this, at the same time you would see his comics, you would also see, and I believe at the same time, Ripley's Believe It or Not.
And then you would see Dick Tracy, and we show at one point that like an entire newspaper, and there's some strip called Grandma that I'm not familiar with, right underneath it. So it's odd to actually look at what the Sunday Funnies was like at the time of Closer Than We Think, because you're looking at, like I said, something like Dick Tracy, and then right underneath it is Space Monkey Colonies, and it's this single panel telling you, hey, this is going to happen, and it's almost like this oddity, of. I think it was for our new age. I think it was President Kennedy actually said to Athelstan Spillhouse, "The only science I ever really got was from your comic strip." So it's a weird thing that it wasn't just kids reading these things at the time. Also, it was spread to all ages.
So, kind of based off of that last question, in terms of these broad strokes of imagination for the future, that doesn't really seem to be something that happens today. I think that like we get very specific about the way that we might envision going about something like, the farm that would be more futuristic and more machine-like. But what do you think our current day sort of imagination for the future sort of relates to a time period like this, where it seems much more broad-stroked, but maybe a little bit more expansive?
You want to take that, Kirk?
It's a great question. I think that there was a technological optimism then. Kennedy saying, "Let's go to the moon." All of those things coming together that Radabaugh was part of. It was kind of like he was living a culture that was very much thinking about where mankind's going to go. I think you're right, which is a lot of our people thinking about things today are thinking about the very next step of technology, the adjacent possible, as opposed to what's impossible, but we could get there if we really worked at it. So
I can tell you that at Institute for the Future, we are thinking very long term, and we're not looking at. We specifically don't look at predictions. We don't predict the future. We don't think anyone can. Those are essentially extrapolations from current trends. Rather, we're trying to think about, plausible, internally consistent, which they talked about in the film, visions of what could happen. I'm less concerned with what is the form factor of the next iPhone that's going to come out in 3 years, and more interested in, what happens when every object, is embedded with connectivity and has supercomputing power built into it. That's more interesting to me. What does that mean for our lives than, the evolution of, the design of something?
Yeah, also, looking into the future, I was part of that Kennedy new generation, new look, the positive social climate that was going on during the space colonization studies and the artwork that came from it. But then later on, the people that were even involved with that started looking to the future of dealing with things like overpopulation on the Earth, and more social problems, and how to feed the masses, and more practical problems rather than far-reaching problems solving. But there are a lot of groups today that are mission-oriented to let's say put a colony on the moon. So they're getting together with large industrial groups and doing inner planning amongst them all. But we don't see that sort of thing. But then you're asking about what vehicles today kind of look in the future. And I say our films that we see. We go to the movie theater, have incredible insight technologically to the future. And I always look at ones like, one that stood out in my mind was like Blade Runner when it first came out. And the social aspects of leaving the Earth in one group and the rest still being down here, and the way the interiors were set at the time, and the food and communications were all this great look into the future that we all saw today in little bits and pieces. Were all, more realized in film, which was quite interesting.
I'd like to thank our panelists. I think we're actually out of time, but I'm sure people can stick around. I'd like to thank you for bringing the film to show us. I mean, to me, the bottom line of this is that it's really about the intersection of art and technology to spark the imagination and to provoke people to think about the future and have a sense of agency in creating it. So I appreciate all the work that you're all doing and the work, the legacy of this fine artist to point us in that direction. Thank you all so much for coming. Have a great evening.
Thank you.